I had exactly $83,400 sitting in my operating room post-op account when my brother's wife drained it through a family escrow transfer I never signed. While I was still groggy from anesthesia, my abdomen stitched, my phone locked in a hospital safe. The bank didn't call it theft at first. They called it an authorized wire. And the only reason I knew it wasn't just a clerical error was the mystery object that showed up on my kitchen counter 2 days later. A plain manila envelope that smelled faintly of cedar, with a single sentence typed on the flap, "Check the metadata." Inside was a cheap silver USB and a torn corner of an event program, the kind you get at a fancy fundraiser, with my family's last name embossed in gold. I didn't scream. I didn't text anyone. I put the envelope down, listened to the quiet clink of ice in the water glass beside my pain meds, and I waited, because I already understood something my family never did. Power isn't volume, it's paperwork. Let me take you back. The winter I turned 16, my father used to say I had a way of making the room colder. He didn't mean temperature, he meant I didn't perform. I didn't sparkle the way my older brother Grant did. Grant with the varsity smile, Grant with the handshake, Grant who could sell silence as generosity. I was the kid who fixed the broken thermostat, then got blamed when the heat didn't feel warm enough. We lived outside Seattle, in a neighborhood where everyone's grass was green even in January, and people said blessed like it was a receipt. My mother ran the house like an event calendar. Grant was always the main attraction. One Thanksgiving, I brought home a robotics trophy. Nothing extravagant, just proof that my brain could build something that worked. Grant had brought home a new girlfriend, Sloane, with a laugh like a wind chime and a manicure that looked expensive even from across the table. My mother hugged Sloane like she'd been missing for years, then looked at my trophy and said, "That's practical." Later, when I was washing dishes, I heard my father's voice carry from the living room. "Grant understands people," he said. "Mara understands machines." It wasn't meant to be cruel. That was the worst part. It was said the way people say the weather will change, like my place in the family was just a fact of nature. The second incident was quieter, which is how my family did most of their damage. I was 19, leaving for college on a scholarship I found and filled out myself. My father stood in the doorway while I packed my suitcase. He didn't help. He didn't fight. He just watched like a man observing a neighbor move out. "You know," he said, "if you were more flexible, you wouldn't have to do it the hard way." I remember the smell of his cedar closet behind him, clean shirts, old cologne, the kind of comfort I'd never been offered. I remember thinking, they don't want me to fail, they just don't mind if I do. And then I left. By 28, I was a systems engineer at a grid tech company in downtown Seattle, one of those places where your badge is both your identity and your leash. I didn't climb by being charming. I climbed by being useful, then being undeniable. The work was high stakes, critical infrastructure, regional utilities, the kind of software that keeps hospitals lit when storms roll in and everybody suddenly remembers electricity is not a suggestion. I also had a flaw I hated admitting out loud. I was so practiced at being ignored that sometimes I made myself easy to overlook. I'd solve the crisis, hand off the report, and slip out before anyone could turn it into a performance. It protected me. It also made me vulnerable in places I didn't expect, like family. When my appendix ruptured, sudden, sharp, humiliating pain that turned my body into a siren, I was alone in my apartment, curled on the kitchen tile, staring at a half-finished grocery list. I called an Uber because I didn't want to bother anyone. That's the kind of quiet damage that lasts. Even while my organs were misbehaving, I was still trying not to take up space. After surgery, I woke up under fluorescent lights, dry mouth, slow thoughts. A nurse asked for my phone to confirm discharge instructions. I told her it was in my bag. She put it in the hospital safe while I slept. "Just for security," she said kindly. The next morning, my mother appeared in my hospital room holding a bouquet that looked like it had been bought for a photo, not a person. Grant followed behind her, wearing concern like a tailored coat. Sloane came last, carrying a leather folder and a coffee with oat milk, my usual order, which should have felt thoughtful, but didn't. It felt like surveillance. "Oh, honey," my mother said, kissing my forehead with lips that didn't linger. "We were so worried." Grant sat on the edge of the chair like he was visiting a client. "We're just glad you're okay," he said, and then his eyes drifted to the nurse's station outside my door. Sloane opened the leather folder. "We don't want you stressing about bills," she said. "So we took care of a few things." I was still too foggy to argue. I let them talk. I let them help. It's amazing what people can do when you're tired enough to confuse peace with surrender. 2 days after I came home, my bank app showed the missing money. $83,400. Gone. The label, Escrow Transfer, Family Holding LLC. It wasn't all my savings, but it was the part that mattered most. The account I'd built for a down payment, the one I'd promised myself would become a home that no one could assign me a corner in. It was the first time in years my hands shook with something besides adrenaline. I called the bank. My voice stayed calm because panic makes you easy to dismiss. The representative said, "It's an authorized wire, Ms. Hale, verified with two-factor." My phone was locked in a hospital safe, I said. I was under anesthesia. A pause, paper shuffling, then, "Do you have any proof of unauthorized access?" Proof. As if betrayal comes with a receipt. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter with the lights low, my incision aching like a reminder not just of surgery, but of consequence. I poured water over ice. The clink was small and steady. I stared at the bank line item until the words blurred. Then I got up, opened my hallway closet, and the familiar scent of cedar drifted out. My winter coats, clean and orderly. The one part of my life my family had never touched. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Grant said he handled your financial stuff. Be grateful." And that's when the manila envelope appeared. No knock, no signature. Just there, like it had always belonged. The envelope smelled like cedar too, which shouldn't have been possible. Inside, the silver USB and the torn program corner, gold embossing, my family name, and beneath it, in smaller type, the Rainier Children's Foundation Winter Gala. I didn't know what check the metadata meant in this context, not yet, but I knew one thing immediately. Someone had been watching my family from the inside, and someone wanted me to win. I plugged the USB into my laptop with the careful precision of a person disarming something. A single video file sat inside, labeled Scans 1218. The footage showed Sloane at a home office printer. She fed papers in like she'd done it 1,000 times. Grant stood behind her, scrolling on a phone I recognized instantly. Mine, with my cracked corner screen protector. My stomach tightened. Sloane held up a document. "Notary stamp looks legit," she said. Grant's voice was low, casual. "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to clear." Then the camera angle shifted slightly, as if whoever recorded it had adjusted their grip, and I saw a detail that made my skin go cold. On the printed page, in tiny yellow dots embedded across the white background, was a pattern only forensic examiners talk about. Printer microdots, a tracking code many color printers invisibly stamp onto pages, encoding the printer's serial number and timestamp. That's metadata. That's proof. I replayed the video twice, listening for background sound, for hints, the faint hum of the printer, the tap of Sloane's nails, and, in the corner of the frame, a blue ribbon hanging from a drawer pull, bright satin, the kind you tie on a gift bag, a childish thing, an innocent thing, and it made the whole scene feel even colder. My eyes drifted back to the program corner. Rainier Children's Foundation Winter Gala. Public. Packed with donors, photographers, board members, a place my family liked to perform their goodness. I didn't call Grant. I didn't call my mother. I did what I always did when a system failed. I built a clean map of the problem. First, I saved the video in 3 places: encrypted drive, cloud vault, and a physical copy hidden behind a row of cookbooks I never used. Second, I called an attorney, not a family friend, not someone who'd be flattered by Grant's charm. A woman named Diane Park, recommended by a colleague who'd once said, "If you want someone to stop a train, call Diane." Her office smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. Order, not comfort. That was fine. I slid my laptop across her desk and said, "My brother and his wife drained $83,400 from my account while I was recovering from surgery. The bank says it's authorized." Diane didn't gasp. She didn't soften. She watched the video once, then again, then paused on the frame with the printed page and the yellow dot pattern. "That," she said, tapping the screen, "is a gift." I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for a week. "Can it hold up?" "If we do this right," she said. "Yes, but you have a clock." "A clock?" Diane folded her hands. "If your bank believes it was authorized, their fraud protections don't apply the same way. We need to put them on notice now. Because if you miss this," she said carefully, "you lose everything you'd ever recover through their internal process." Her voice was steady, not dramatic. That steadiness hit me harder than anger would have. "What's the deadline?" I asked. 10 business days from the wire," she said. "We file an affidavit of unauthorized transfer, demand a hold, and request their security logs. We also open a civil case against your brother and sister-in-law for fraud and conversion. And," she added, "we do not warn them." I swallowed. "Their family." Diane's eyes stayed on mine. "They treated your hospital bed like an opportunity." The words landed with the weight of truth. I felt something in me settle, not into hatred, but into clarity. "This isn't revenge," I said, surprising myself with how calm it sounded. "This is justice." Diane nodded once. "Good. Because justice is what courts understand." Over the next week, I moved like a person rebuilding a damaged network. Quiet, methodical, leaving no loose ends. Diane drafted an affidavit for me to sign, sworn statement describing my surgery date, anesthesia time, the hospital safe. She explained, in plain language, why the word mattered. "An affidavit," she said, "forces them to treat your statement as evidence. Lying on it has consequences. It tells the bank you're not asking, you're documenting." We had it notarized at a UPS store because the absurdity of it made me laugh once, softly, into my scarf. My life reduced to stamp and signature. Then Diane filed a civil complaint. She used phrases I'd only ever heard on TV, but now mattered in my real life. Injunctive relief, temporary restraining order, asset freeze. I made her explain every term like I was debugging a program. "An asset freeze," she said, "is a court order preventing them from moving or spending what they stole once we trace it into accounts. We'll also subpoena their bank records. If they moved your money into an LLC, we pierce that structure by showing it's a shell used for fraud." "Shell," I repeated. "A fake container," she said. "Legally dressed up, still empty." I nodded. Under my ribs, my stitches itched, healing, irritating, unavoidable. Then the first setback came, from my own flaw. I waited too long to tell my employer I needed documentation. I didn't want to be seen as messy. I didn't want to be the person with drama. But Diane needed confirmation of my account structure and bonus schedule to show the transfer's impact and the pattern of targeted access. When I finally approached HR, they were polite but slow. "Bureaucracy doesn't rush for your pain." Diane didn't scold me. She just said, "Mara, you don't get points for suffering quietly. Get me what I asked for today." So I did. And while that moved, Diane worked her own angle, the video's hidden power. "Metadata isn't just the microdots," she told me. "It's also the file itself." She pulled up the video properties. "See this? The file was created the same night as your discharge, and it was recorded from an internal camera, something stationary." "Like, what?" I asked. Diane's gaze sharpened. "Like a nanny cam, or a home security camera, someone in their house." My stomach tightened again, but this time with a different feeling, anticipation. The ally was inside. We didn't know who yet, but we didn't have to, not immediately. Grant, meanwhile, moved exactly the way people do when they think they've gotten away with something. He called on day 8, his voice warm. "Hey, Mara, Mom said you seemed stressed." I looked at my phone like it was a bug I couldn't swat. I put it face down. I listened to the clink of ice as I dropped 2 cubes into a glass. Then I answered. "Hey," I said. "You're not still fixated on that transfer, are you?" Grant chuckled lightly. "It was for a short-term thing? We were going to tell you?" "Tell me what?" I asked. "That it's temporary," he said, patient, like I was the unreasonable one. "We moved it into family holding to keep it safe, while you're recovering. Sloane's just being proactive." "Proactive," I repeated softly. "Plus," he added, "this could be good for you. You have money just sitting there. We're building something." A pause. Then, like he couldn't help himself, "The Rainier Children's Foundation Gala is next week. We're being honored. Big deal. You should come." The invitation wasn't for me. It was a stage. My incision pulled when I stood up too fast. Pain flashed, sharp and honest. "Maybe," I said. Grant exhaled like he'd won. "Good. Dress nice. People will be there." People, donors, board members, photographers. My jaw tightened in a way that felt new, like my body recognized the battlefield before my mind admitted it. That night, Diane called. "They filed their response," she said, "and it's insulting." "What did they say?" I asked. "They're claiming you agreed to invest," Diane replied. "They attached a signed authorization." My throat went dry. "A signed authorization?" I said. "Yes," Diane said. "Your signature, or something that looks like it." I didn't need to be a handwriting expert to know what they'd done. Sloane had printed the page. Grant had scrolled my phone. They'd forged the rest. Diane didn't let my panic breathe. "Here's the good news," she said. "Forgery is clean, judges don't like it, and we have timing, metadata, and your surgery record. But we need one more thing." "What?" "Where the money went," she said. "Because if it's already spent, recovery is harder. Not impossible. Harder." I stared at the envelope on my counter. I breathed in, caught that faint cedar scent again. The anonymous ally had given me the start of a map. I needed the rest. The next morning, another message arrived, from an unknown number. No greeting. "Look under the blue ribbon." My pulse thumped, controlled but fast. Blue ribbon. I'd seen it in the video. I drove, still sore, to my parents' house in Bellevue under the excuse of dropping off soup. My mother greeted me like I was a photo opportunity. She kissed my cheek too brightly, then immediately looked at my coat brand. "You look better," she said, as if surprised. I walked through the familiar living room where everything was staged, pillows aligned, family portraits smiling like propaganda. The air had that same old candle smell, spiced, artificial, pretending to be comfort. Somewhere in the back, my father's closet still carried cedar, the real kind. I hated that my body remembered it. Grant and Sloane weren't there. Convenient. I handed my mother the soup, smiled politely, and asked, "Where's your guest bathroom? I need to wash my hands." She waved me down the hall. In the guest bathroom, I locked the door, then opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Cleaning supplies, extra towels, and there it was, a decorative basket with a blue ribbon tied around it like a gift. My fingers trembled as I loosened the knot. Under the basket lining was a small black device, compact, with a blinking green light, a home security hub, a micro SD slot. My breath caught. The ally wasn't just inside their house. The ally had installed the eyes. I slid the micro SD out with careful fingers and replaced everything exactly as it had been. I washed my hands. I looked in the mirror. My face was pale. My eyes were steady. In the kitchen, my mother chatted about the gala. "It's such an honor," she said. "Grant is finally getting the recognition he deserves." I nodded, stirring my coffee even though I wasn't drinking it. The spoon clicked against the mug. Another small sound, like the clink of ice, reminding me that quiet things can still be sharp. "Are you coming?" she asked. "I think so," I said. Her smile widened. "Good. Family should show up." I didn't correct her. Not yet. At Diane's office, we pulled the footage. Hours of it. Not everything mattered, but the pieces that did, they were surgical. Grant and Sloane on their couch, laughing about moving money around like chess. Sloane saying, "She won't fight it, she never fights." Grant replying, "She'll complain to the bank and then go back to being quiet." Then a clip from the night before the wire transfer, Sloane holding a printed form, Grant on my phone, and Grant saying, almost bored, "Just send it through the LLC. If she asks, we say it's for tax planning." That phrase, tax planning, was what liars use when they want you to feel stupid for questioning them. Diane leaned closer to the screen. "There," she said. "What?" I asked. On the coffee table, in plain sight, was an envelope stamped with a mortgage company logo. My stomach tightened. "They used your money for property," Diane said. My pulse steadied into something colder. "Where?" Diane paused the frame, zoomed in, enhanced the image like she'd done it 1,000 times. The address came into view. A modern condo in Kirkland, Lakeview, the kind of place Grant and Sloane had always wanted, but claimed they were waiting for the right time. They weren't waiting. They'd just decided my money was the right time. Diane's voice was calm. "That's a down payment. We can trace that. We can file for a LI's pendens." "A what?" I asked. "It's a notice recorded on the property title," she said. "It warns the world there's a legal dispute attached. It makes it nearly impossible for them to sell or refinance without addressing your claim." My throat tightened, not with sadness, but with something like vindication. Quiet, clean, legal. Then Diane pointed to another detail. A second folder on Sloane's laptop screen in one clip, caught when she'd left the camera angle open just enough. The folder name, Rainier Donor Docs. Diane's voice lowered. The second folder changed everything. Because stealing from me was one thing. But donor documents, foundation funds, that was a different universe of consequences. Diane didn't jump to conclusions. She never did. She just said, "We need to be careful. If they're mixing charitable funds with personal and LLC accounts, that's exposure. But we don't accuse without proof." "How do we get proof?" I asked. "We subpoena," she said, "and we leverage the timing." "The gala," I said. Diane's mouth tightened, almost a smile. "Exactly. The week of the gala, Seattle got hit with a storm that rolled in like a warning. Rain hard enough to blur the skyline, wind that made the trees bow. It felt like the city itself was tired of pretending everything was stable. My stitches had mostly healed, but I still moved carefully. I wore a black dress with clean lines, nothing flashy, just enough to look like I belonged in a room my family liked to control. Diane met me outside the venue, an upscale hotel ballroom downtown, chandeliers, valet parking, the kind of place where people donate money to feel absolved. She handed me a slim folder. "Inside is a demand letter," she said. "It's also your shield. It outlines the claim, the evidence, and the court filing number. If anyone tries to make you look emotional, you don't argue. You hand them paper." I nodded. "And Mara?" Diane said, her voice quiet. "Remember, your job is not to win them over. Your job is to put them on record." I slipped the folder into my clutch. Inside the ballroom, everything glittered. The air smelled like perfume and champagne and ambition. Somewhere, a jazz trio played soft enough to be ignored. I found my family near the front, exactly where they'd want to be seen. Grant looked expensive. Sloane looked flawless. My mother wore pearls like armor. When they saw me, their smiles brightened a fraction too late. "Mara," Grant said, pulling me into a hug that didn't touch. "You made it." Sloane's eyes flicked to my clutch. "You look strong," she said. I smiled politely. "I'm healing." My mother squeezed my arm. "After everything we've done for you," she whispered, like it was a prayer. I said nothing. A donor, an older man with silver hair and a confident, bored face, stepped up to Grant and clapped him on the shoulder. "Ready for your moment?" he asked. Grant's smile widened. "Always." The event program in my hand was thick, glossy. I tore off the corner carefully, an echo of the torn piece in my envelope. Paper fibers tugged, a small sound, almost like a whisper. Then, just as the host stepped onto the stage to begin the honors, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then, blackout. A collective inhale rushed through the room. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else cursed under their breath. Emergency lights glowed low, dim, and dramatic. It wasn't planned, but it was perfect. In the darkness, I heard Grant say, too loud, "Seriously? Not tonight." Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Now. My heart didn't race. It steadied. I moved through the dim crowd toward the side corridor, where hotel staff clustered around a service panel. The storm had triggered a breaker. Someone was fumbling with a flashlight, and there, standing near the service door like she belonged there, was a woman in a simple gray blazer with a staff badge. She saw me and didn't smile. "Ms. Hale?" she said softly. "Yes." She handed me a sealed envelope, heavier than paper should be. The smell of cedar rose from it, faint, unmistakable. "My name is Nina," she said. "I work for the foundation." "You sent the USB?" I asked. Nina's eyes flicked toward the ballroom. "I installed the camera," she said. "I'm also the compliance officer." The ally identity twist landed so cleanly I almost laughed. "You're inside the foundation?" I said. Nina nodded. "They've been using donor funds as a bridge loan," she said. "It's been hidden through the LLC. I couldn't prove it without access to the printer logs and the wire trail. But your situation, your hospital timing, created a crack. I put a canary in the crack." "A canary?" I asked, and even now my brain wanted definitions. Nina's voice stayed quiet. "A trigger clause. If they touched certain funds, a reporting sequence activates. It's meant to protect the charity. And they touched it." I exhaled slowly. Inside the envelope were copies, bank statements, wire confirmations, and a memo signed by Sloan authorizing temporary transfers from the Foundation's restricted account into Family Holding LLC. Restricted. That meant money designated for specific programs, not personal cash flow. "I'm reporting this," Nina said, and her jaw tightened. "Tonight. But you need to protect yourself first. Your case gives the investigators a clean entry point." The lights flickered again. Staff shouted that power would return in a minute. I looked at Nina. "Why help me?" Nina's expression didn't soften. "Because I'm tired of watching people with money cosplay as good," she said. "And because your file, it's the first time I've seen a victim with enough discipline to actually follow through." I nodded once. "Thank you." Back in the ballroom, the lights snapped on to scattered applause like the audience was relieved their performance could continue. The host returned to the mic, joking about Seattle weather. Grant straightened his tux jacket, smile reset. Sloan lifted her chin. They walked toward the stage as if nothing could touch them. I didn't chase them. I didn't grab a microphone. I walked to the front row, stepped beside the event photographer, and waited. Because patience is also a weapon, and I was done wasting it. When Grant's name was announced and the room applauded, he turned toward the crowd with practiced humility. That's when Diane appeared from the aisle like she'd been conjured by the word consequence. She moved with the calm speed of someone who doesn't ask permission. She stopped at the edge of the stage and handed the host a document. The host's smile faltered as he scanned the first lines. "What's this?" he mouthed. Diane didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "It's a notice of pending litigation," Diane said evenly, just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "And a request that the Foundation's board temporarily suspend Mr. Hale from any fiduciary role until an investigation is complete." Grant's smile froze. Sloane's eyes narrowed, quick. My mother's pearls seemed suddenly too tight around her throat. The host, caught between social etiquette and legal reality, looked toward the ballroom manager, then toward the foundation's board table. A woman there stood abruptly, older, stern, the kind of donor board hybrid who understood reputation as currency. "Grant," she said, voice clipped, "step off the stage." The room's applause died midair. A few people coughed. Someone laughed awkwardly, then stopped when no one joined. Grant blinked, still trying to keep his expression pleasant. "This is inappropriate," he said, voice forced. Diane didn't flinch. "So is forging a wire authorization," she replied, still calm. Sloane's face flushed. "Just a hint." "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly. Diane turned slightly and held up a second sheet. "This," she said, "is a forensic summary prepared for court. It explains printer microdot metadata, how your home printer stamps time and serial number onto printed documents. The forged authorization was printed at 9:42 p.m. on the night Ms. Hale was under hospital care." A ripple moved through the nearest tables like wind through grass. Grant's eyes darted. Sloane's mouth opened, then closed. My mother whispered, "Mara, what are you doing?" I looked at her, finally, and felt nothing sharp, just final. "I'm documenting," I said. Grant tried to recover. "Mara, come on," he said softly, as if he could still pull me back into quietness. "We can fix this." "You already fixed it," I said. "For yourselves." Then Nina stood, not next to me, not as my ally in a dramatic sense. She stood at her own table, as herself. "As compliance officer," Nina said, voice clear but not loud, "I'm notifying the board that restricted donor funds appear to have been transferred into Family Holding LLC. I've prepared a report for the State Attorney General's Charities Division." That's when the room changed completely, because donors don't tolerate misused generosity, not because they're saints, but because they hate looking foolish. Grant's face drained of color. Sloane's hand tightened around his arm like she could anchor him. And my father, who had been standing behind my mother, stared at the stage like he was seeing his golden child for the first time without the lighting filter. The host, voice shaking, said, "Let's take a brief intermission." But the intermission was already happening in people's minds. Phones came out. Whispers multiplied. Grant stepped off the stage and walked straight toward me, his smile gone. "What did you do?" he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. I tilted my head slightly. "I followed the evidence." Sloane leaned in, eyes sharp. "You're going to ruin us over money?" I looked at her, then at Grant. "No," I said. "You ruined yourselves over money." My mother's voice trembled. "Mara, stop, please. Think about the family." I held her gaze. I'm thinking about the family I built without you." Grant's jaw tightened. "We were going to pay it back." "After you closed on your condo?" I asked softly. His eyes flickered, one fraction of a second, and that was the confession. Diane stepped closer, folder in hand, and spoke like she was reading code aloud. "Mr. Hale, Ms. Carter," she said, "you've been served. You are ordered not to transfer, conceal, or encumber assets pending a hearing. If you violate this, we will seek contempt sanctions." Sloane's voice went thin. "You can't do that." Diane's expression didn't change. "We already did." Grant's hands curled, not in violence, just in helplessness. "Where's Dad?" he snapped, like his father could still fix consequences the way he'd fixed Grant's childhood mistakes by pretending they weren't real. My father didn't move. For the first time, he didn't rescue him with a laugh. He just stared. The next morning, Diane and I sat in the King County Courthouse hallway outside a hearing room that smelled like old carpet and institutional coffee. The weather had cleared, the storm had moved on, leaving the city clean and indifferent. Grant arrived with a new attorney, sleek suit, aggressive posture. Sloane walked beside them, sunglasses on indoors, like denial could be worn. My mother showed up too, clutching her purse like it was a shield. She tried to speak to me. "Mara," she whispered, "you don't understand." I didn't answer. I put my phone face down. I listened to the quiet clink of ice in my memory, like a metronome reminding me, keep steady. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes, looked over the filings. Diane spoke first. She didn't perform. She laid out the timeline: surgery, hospital safe, unauthorized wire, forged authorization, printer metadata, traced funds to a property down payment. Then Nina's report was introduced, not as a dramatic accusation, but as documentation sent to the proper authorities. Grant's attorney tried to argue it was a family misunderstanding, that I was overreacting, that no criminal intent existed. The judge didn't look impressed. Diane asked for immediate relief, an asset freeze on family holding LLC accounts, a temporary restraining order preventing contact and retaliation, and a recorded lease pendens on the Kirkland condo. Grant's attorney objected. The judge raised a hand, and then, in a voice that was quiet enough to force everyone to listen, she said, "Forgery is not a misunderstanding." The courtroom went silent. You could hear paper shift. You could hear someone's breath catch. The judge signed the temporary orders. Grant's face went blank, shock without theatrics. Sloane's lips pressed together so hard they nearly disappeared. My mother made a small sound, like she'd been struck, but no one rushed to comfort her. Not here. Courts don't reward performance. Outside, in the hallway, Grant finally broke his controlled tone. "You're really doing this," he said, voice low, furious. "I'm finishing it," I replied. Sloane stepped forward, her composure fraying. "You always wanted to punish us," she spat. I looked at her, calm. "No," I said. "I wanted you to see me. You just couldn't, until paperwork forced you to." My mother's eyes filled. "Mara, please," she whispered. "We can fix this." I breathed in. The courthouse air didn't smell like cedar. It smelled like cleaning solution and time. "You can't fix what you never admitted you broke," I said. Then Diane touched my elbow lightly. "We're done here," she murmured. We walked out together. Rain tapped faintly on the courthouse steps, like the city was reminding everyone, consequences don't require applause. Over the next months, the legal machine did what it does best: slow, relentless, unromantic. The forensic audit Diane requested traced the $83,400 into Family Holding LLC, then into escrow for the condo. The lender, notified through the LS pendens, froze parts of the closing timeline retroactively and demanded explanations. The foundation's board suspended Grant, pending investigation. Donors withdrew pledges. Nina's report triggered state oversight. Not because anyone cared about me personally, but because money misused in the wrong direction makes powerful people move fast. Grant and Sloane tried to settle quietly. They offered repayment. Partial, with conditions. Diane asked me what I wanted. I stared out my apartment window at the gray Seattle sky, the world steady and large. "I want the full amount returned," I said, "and I want boundaries that are enforceable." Diane nodded. "Then we build them." The settlement included full repayment with interest, legal fees, and a non-disparagement clause, meaning they couldn't smear me publicly without consequences. It also included a restraining order extension based on harassing messages my mother had sent after the gala, thinking guilt was a legal argument. Diane made sure every term was explained and enforceable. And because Nina was thorough, the foundation adopted a new compliance policy, one that included a quiet, brutal little protection called a canary clause. If certain restricted funds were touched again, automatic reporting would trigger without internal debate. No one called it revenge, they called it governance. My family, meanwhile, lost something they valued more than my forgiveness: their story. They could no longer say they were generous without someone asking, "To who? At what cost?" My mother tried once more. She sent a letter, paper, handwritten, scented with something that tried to mimic cedar but wasn't. It said she missed me. It said she didn't recognize who I'd become. It said I was hard. I read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer without answering. Hard is what you call someone who stops being convenient. 1 year later, I was sitting in a small coffee shop on Bainbridge Island, watching the ferry glide across the water like a quiet promise. The place smelled like real cedar, wood beams, damp air, espresso. I stirred my iced coffee and listened to that familiar clink. Across from me sat Jordan, my partner, steady, kind, not impressed by performance. He didn't ask me to explain my pain in a way that made it easier for others to digest. He just held space for it. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About them?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "About me," I said. "About how long I spent trying to earn basic decency." Jordan nodded once. "And now?" "Now," I said. "I spend that time building things that last." Work had changed too. I'd been promoted, head of systems at my company, because my work spoke louder than anyone's opinion. I mentored junior engineers who reminded me of my younger self, talented, quiet, trying not to take up space. I made sure they were seen. As for Grant and Sloan, the consequences were karmic, not cruel. The condo deal collapsed under title dispute scrutiny and frozen funds. They moved into a smaller rental and sold the image they'd built because it was no longer affordable. The foundation investigation ended with forced resignation and board restructuring. Nina kept her job and, according to Diane, got promoted. Governance rewarded the person who did the hard thing quietly. My parents didn't come to my apartment anymore. They didn't invite me to holidays. The silence returned, but it wasn't punishment this time. It was peace. On a rainy afternoon, I opened my closet at home and breathed in the real cedar scent of my coats and clean air and earned safety. I touched the small silver USB I'd kept in a box, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Evidence is a form of self-respect. Sometimes people ask me if I regret making it public. I don't. Because the public part wasn't me humiliating them. The public part was them losing control of the narrative they'd been hiding behind. I learned something simple, and it cost me $83,400 to learn it. If someone only recognizes your worth when they can benefit from it, they never recognized your worth at all. So here's my question for you, honestly. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your future? And if you're building your boundaries